Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about Azure's OpenAI services. Now this is a new service available on Azure where Microsoft and OpenAI have partnered together to create something that enables you to have ChatGPT 4 as part of Azure services. So it has the ability to integrate with a lot of different services on Azure, but I just kind of want to look at it at a high level today and then just do a quick demo of what you can kind of do with it just out of the box without having to do a lot of fancy coding or thinking about the problem or the context. I just want to basically repeat what I did with my on-prem demo where I used a local GPT and I was able to interact with a set of documents. But in this case, I'm going to use Azure and I'm going to upload basically the same source into Azure and then interact with it using ChatGPT as well. So it's basically just kind of repeating what I've already done, but using the services instead. Now, of course, what I'm going to show you is just the bare bones. There's a lot of things that you can kind of do to massage this to make it even better, which I'll probably be looking into those topics in future videos as well. But for now, let's just take a look at OpenAI and what you can kind of do with it just out of the box without really having to do a lot of finagling with your data or having to wrestle with the models themselves. So if you've ever worked with AI, you know that you kind of have to wrangle data to get it into a format that you can use with AI. Now, to make this all work with Azure's search and also make it indexable by Azure Search, I have to break these files right here inside of this folder up into something that it can ingest. So these are the manuscripts from my novels, which are just documents that are typed in Word. There's graphics embedded and there's a lot of other things about these, but I need to get them into a format that I can use, which requires that I have text data that's less than 32 kilobytes in size. And so that's what I've done here. So this is kind of the output from that. And so I basically took everything and broke it up by chapter. And then if the chapter was longer than 32 kilobits, I took it and broke it into two separate files. And that's why we see some of these with _1 after them, because these are longer chapters that needed more than what was available in a 32K file. So to do that, I wrote this simple PowerShell script here. And the PowerShell script is just basically taking the data, reading each file, rather the document. It's using the header in the document as a demarcation between each chapter. And then it's taking the data from each chapter and then writing that to a text file. If it's longer than any particular length, like 32K, I think is the limit I put in here, it just breaks it into another secondary file for that. And then it just writes it out to that directory, that out folder. And so this is all done in PowerShell. I just use PowerShell because PowerShell has the interoperability with Microsoft Office, and it was something that I just use. I mean, no particular reason, I just use PowerShell. You could do this in any language, but PowerShell is just the one I used to do this. So I broke it up into this folder right here. And this is what I uploaded into the storage account that we mentioned a moment ago. And so we'll look at why that's important in a moment. But basically, once I have the data ready, I can then take the data and put it into a storage account. And that's exactly what I did here. I just created a storage account, nothing special there, created a container, and then in this I have uploaded all of those documents. And there's 300 and some change in that. And so basically 300 documents that I can now ingest into the search service. So let's talk about vector databases for a minute. This is one of the key concepts in the way that AI works with something like Azure Cognitive Search. Now, when I ingested all of my data last week using local GPT, it built a vector database from that data. And that's what I'm able to interact with using something like ChatGPT or another large language model. Now, there's a couple common databases that people are going to be familiar with, and that's like a key value database, which is something like Azure Table Storage or Azure a document database. This would be like MongoDB or the NoSQL API and Cosmos DB, and a graph database, which is something like the Gremlin API or Neo4j Gremlin API inside of Cosmos DB. Now, a vector database is probably most like the graph database because this one has nodes and edges, and you can relate the nodes to other nodes using the edges that relate to them. And it's not necessarily hierarchical like this representation. You can relate any node to any other node in the database, and you define the relationships based on the nodes, and you can put properties on the nodes and on the edges themselves, and you can traverse each of those edges to find related information. So if this is a person, I could find out where they live, and then based on where they live, I could find out restaurants in that area. So that's just a for example. Now, a vector database is kind of like a graph database, but the relationships in a vector database aren't binary in the sense that they either exist or don't exist. Vector databases is define relationships based on similarity. So the relationship is basically a ratio. It might have a strong affinity for something or strong similarity, or it might have a weaker affinity or a weaker similarity to something. And that the strength of that similarity defines how you're going to select inside of a vector database. And so you have typically multiple dimensions. This is only representing 2 dimensions, but you can have multiple dimensions in a vector database. You could have 3, 4, 10, it doesn't really matter. But the affinity between 2 different entities in the database is going to basically be the overlap they have with their vector relationship they have with one another. And that might be, as I said, strong, and represented by a number between 0 and 1. It would be closer to 1, or weak, be closer to the 0. And so it's more of a statistical significance that we're looking for in our vector database, rather than just a hard link between the various entities in the database. And so all of the entities in a vector database are going to be represented by an array, and then that array will have multiple dimensions in it. So it could have 2 or 4 or 10 dimensions in it, and it's able to look at the similarities between other entities with similar arrays and get data out of that. And so the ability to build this more nebulous approach to relationships enables us to have a little bit more of a heuristics approach to searching for data. And that's what we want with AI, so that we can have a relationship between the entities that may be there, but it might not be there at the same time. So it gives some ambiguity to it, but where it's stronger, that's what's going to be the output in our model. And that's what models are essentially trained to do, is to figure out what's going to be the most similar to what I am putting into my prompt. So it's going to try to infer from that prompt similarities to other things in the database and similarities to other things in the model, and from that produce a response where it's trying to detect intent and other things like that. So with a vector database, that's the golden egg that gets us better search results than any of these other ones would if we were using these other ones in AI. You can, and there are ways to do that, but for the best results in AI, vector databases are really going to be our bread and butter. So to give you an idea of what I'm hoping to get out of the OpenAI services on Azure, I'm going to use the ChatGPT Plus. And again, I went over this, and I gladly pay for this because I use this quite a bit for a lot of different tasks. But I want to import my data into this to see how well it works with it. So I'm just going to grab all of my manuscripts and upload these into the ChatGPT Plus. This allows me to basically ingest files, just like I did locally in local GPT, and which we'll look at in just a minute on Azure. And once these are ingested, it's going to quickly index them, and I should be able to interact with these documents because they're just data from the perspective of ChatGPT. So I can type in a prompt here. It says, tell me about Kamen's past. And Kamen is one of the characters in this. So from this, I should be able to get something about Kamen's past. Oops. Let me edit that. Kamen's past. Save it, and let's see what it generates. And this should be able to create something. It's doing a search for Kamen's past because it detected that kind of as a keyword. And it's opening up the file. I have no idea which one it's doing. Probably could expand this. Okay, it opened up Enemy of My Enemy, which was interesting that it chose that one. But it does give some backstory on him. Avoiding trouble. He tries to view. That's true. Appreciates the gypsy lifestyle. Yeah, in their community. He's transitioning from a monastic life, which he was one of his things. Resilience and independence, journey, trauma had memory. That's interesting. He pulled that out. Profound event in his childhood revealed where and involved a tragic accident where leading to the death of another boy after Cameron ran away into the forest. The memory haunts him and has a profound impact on his life choices, which is very true. Cameron identifies as a protective figure traveling with two women and a boy, showcasing a role of guardian and caretaker roles. That's very true. And Mon, who is likely a significant character in Cameron's narrative, is depicted as embarking on a grueling journey westward, demonstrating resilience and strong independent streak. His journey is a diverse landscape and grasslands and scrublands and so on. Yeah, that's with Mon, who's one of the main characters as well. And he becomes Cameron becomes like a father figure to him in the story. So this is fairly accurate. So that's pretty good. And so I'd expect similar results using GPT on Azure. So let's try to use this in a similar fashion on Azure. So I have here a resource group called Paladin GPT, and I have Azure OpenAI created already, as well as Azure Search Services, which enables me to use Azure Cognitive Search. And then I also have a storage account. And we'll look at what those actually do in a moment. Now, the one that we're obviously going to be most interested in is Azure's OpenAI. Now, what I'm going to be doing today is, like I said, going to be interacting with my documents, but the actual service can do quite a few things. And so this is basically the blade to configure the resource inside of Azure. And you've got things like networking, which you can do private endpoints and keys and management, model deployments and things like that, which we'll get into model deployments in a moment. But this is just to configure the resource. The real bread and butter of this thing is inside of Azure's OpenAI Studio. Now, this is basically just a sandbox that allows you to work with models that are available inside the service with your data. So you don't have to really write any code in this. It's going to be able to do a lot of this stuff for you. And the way that this works is with the three basic services that it provides, and then it has the various things down here that you can use to massage your data. And with these three services, you have the chat service, which is the one that most people are familiar with, which is the ability to interact with a chat bot that will also interact with your documents. So you can ask it questions and it will be contextually aware what's going on. And then you can continue to have a conversation and refine the conversation as you get data in and out of your model, as well as your data context, which in our case will be documents. Completions is basically the ability to have a completion of a question. So this is summarize this text or summarize this data or tell me about X, Y, or Z, or those kinds of queries that are more about trying to complete a intent or complete a question, rather not something that is interactive like a chat would be. So chats and completions are similar to one another, but they have different intents. So a chat is more interactive, while a completion is more a one-off type thing, and then you get results back. So it depends on what you're trying to do with your particular use case. Now, Dolly is basically the ability to create AI-generated graphics, which it's pretty cool, but we're not going to look at that today. But it's just the ability to interact with a AI that can produce some pretty interesting looking graphics. If you want to try that out, it's fairly cool. So down here we have our files, and these are where we're able to interact with data files for training data sets. We'll probably do a video on this later on, but this is basically the ability to create custom models that you can use in conjunction with some of the other models. So it's basically transfer learning. So you can build a custom model with your data, but also apply GPT's models to this as well, or OpenAI's models to this as well, and get some fairly sophisticated results basically off of your data. Now, what we're going to look at today is around the data that we're going to be using in our chatbot here, which is using the indexed data from Azure Cognitive Search in conjunction with one of the models that is available through the OpenAI service. So for me, this is really where the cool factor comes in, and it's the ability to interact with your own data like we did with a local instance where we're running with local GPT. So this one right here is pretty straightforward. So the way this works is you basically pick a model and you pick a model version, and we want to use Turbo 16K and a deployment name, and we can call this one PAL GPT. And it's got advanced options down here. And this is just for rate limiting and things like that. It's for tokens so that you don't blow this wide open. So you want to throttle it in some ways, because if you don't, you could have a lot of people hitting this and it could really run your bill up if you don't have some kind of throttling turned on. You can turn this on, and this right here enables you to add your own data. So for this to work, it's a preview feature right now, and so it's not fully baked, and I think you'll see the output from this in a minute. But when you add your own data into this, you can have a data source which is based on Azure Cognitive Search. Now, if I select Azure Blob Storage, it's going to build for me something in Azure Cognitive Search. So it'll basically build the index for me based on something in Azure Blob Storage. And so if I wanted to do that, I could come over here and create a blob storage instance, which I have right here, called Paladin GPT, and I have the data in this particular container. And I can also have a search resource, which in this case is Paladin Search. I can also create a new one right here if I want to do that. And that's what I'm going to come in here and look at. Now, the new one is basically going to give me a new search service that will give me the ability to go through this wizard and do a new search service. Since I've already got one, I'm going to use the one that I currently have. And this one allows me to create a new index. And the new index is going to basically be a index of my documents. And the documents themselves are going to be located in the storage account. And how often you do this is basically how often you want to run the indexer against the document. So if you have multiple documents, or you're constantly refreshing the documents, or you have new data coming in, you can set up a scheduler that'll reindex those documents and refresh the search as well. So I'm going to do a once off right here. And you can add a vector search to this. Adding a vector search to the source will give you the ability to not only have more intelligent searches, but it'll give you the ability to interact with the model a little bit more effectively too. Because vector searches basically are the ability to have data transformed into what they call a vector. And rather than doing things like text searches where you're looking for keywords, vectors is more about affinity for different terms. So vectors that are more similar to other vectors will have a correlation associated with them. And so this is where you get more context. This is where you get more inference. And this is where you get something that's going to be a little bit more intelligent versus just doing like keyword searches, which can return okay results, but a vector search is definitely a better approach to this. And so we're going to choose this one right here and then click next. And then the search type, we're going to do a hybrid vector. We can do a hybrid vector or keyword search, and click next, and then save and close. And it's going to then ingest all of my documents into that that particular indexer, and then it's going to build the model for me. And so after this is done, I will come back and we'll actually try to interact with this particular example. So it built for me the index right here, index 1. And so I'm going to basically interact with this using this over here. So I'm going to enter the same prompt I entered into GPT-4. This is actually using GPT 3.5. So the results might vary because I am using a different model. But in any case, let's just see what happens. Tell me about Kamen's Pass. And let's see what happens. And let's see if it is able to query those documents. And it's going to... Please try another query topic. Okay, let's see what happens. Tell me about Kamen. Okay, so this is interesting. It says that the character mentioned in retrieved documents, he's described as an older man with almost white hair and aged face. He's associated with a monastery. He's depicted as having a troubled mind, experiencing restless sleep and thoughts. Kamen also possesses magical abilities using stones and spells and combat corruption. Additionally, he's acquainted with a person named Akira, who is a connection with his past for who he knew. Interesting. He picked that out of my enemy right there. Okay. let's try tell me about a Kara's past to see if that can pick up some results there and see what it tells me here. Okay, this is getting somewhere. Akira is mentioned in the retrieved document. She's depicted as a woman who has various experiences and encounters throughout her life. And here are some of the details. She's a visit from Jorn's residence. That happened in one of the novels. In Not Home, that was, I think, the third novel. The Akira's connection with Kamen. Of course, she's reels up Ponrai that in Jorn's past. Ponrai is Jorn's wife. And she has this, and so he spent time at a monastery. That's true. And assisting him in the library. She has a relationship with Kamen. They share a close bond, and Kamen being her mentor and friend. Yeah, and Kamen goes to Thyric, who's an innkeeper who has a relationship with, and Akira's decision to confront her pursuers. The sense of that happens in the third novel as well. So I think it's getting most of this out of some of the Shadow of the Demon, some of the Legacy, the Legend, which is the third novel. So interesting results there. So you can interact with these using the chat feature right here. And we did index that using our indexer, and that is using a vector search. So hopefully this has given you some context just at a high level of the things that you can do with something like Azure's OpenAI services. Now, we used the ChatGPT 4 as a point of comparison based on just taking the defaults basically after I ingested a bunch of documents into our AI search on Azure. And so when we compare the results off of the AI service on Azure were a little rough around the edges. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I think it could have been a lot better. The results on OpenAI ChatGPT 4 were pretty stellar, considering that I had to do very little to make that work. So we would have to tweak the output from the Azure implementation to get better results. And there's a lot of things that you can do to adjust it. And there's parameters that we didn't look at. There's things that you can do with data that we didn't look at. And of course, there's other ways to do searches in Azure using OpenAI. And hopefully we'll explore some of those other options in the future. And it's a matter of picking out which one of those is going to be the best option for your use case. And so I'm going to be exploring this in future videos as I kind of do more deep dive sessions into some of the various permutations of these OpenAI services on Azure resources. So stay tuned for videos like that. If you like this video, like it. Also share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel so you can get notified whenever you get new content. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.
If you like this content, please consider subscribing to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button. You can also like this content by clicking on the thumbs up or share this content with your friends, and also comment in the comment section down below. You can also find me online at www.blaze.net or on Twitter at @TheOneMule. And as always, thanks for watching.